And we will go ahead and get things kicked off. So thanks again for everyone for joining us this morning. Again, my name is Brad Copenhaver. I'm our Deputy Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry here representing Secretary Ring and helping to facilitate this meeting. First of all, I want to say a big thank you to Commissioner Brunau and her staff at VDAX for helping us set this meeting up this morning. Our staff here in the governor's office who normally helps out with this had other commitments this week, and so VDAX stepped up and allowed us to use their account, their WebEx account, and help me train on it. So hopefully this meeting will run smoothly, but if it doesn't, just know it's because this is my first time ever running a WebEx meeting, but I think we'll be all good. And I know we have a couple other folks who may still be logging on. So as attendees log on, I will make members of the subgroup and of the work group panelists to participate in the meeting. And we can go from there. So first thing on our agenda this morning is to select a subgroup chair and vice chair, or however you all see fit to do this. So just to start, this is the legal and regulatory subgroup. This is our first meeting. This is one of 3 subgroups that the marijuana legalization work group created in its initial meeting about 2 weeks ago on the 31st of July. So we have the legal and regulatory, this group. We have a fiscal and structural subgroup, which is meeting directly after this group ends at 11 o'clock. And then we have a health impacts subgroup that is going to be meeting on Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Also, I know that we have a lot of folks who are serving and who are following this that are going to be very invested in the General Assembly's special session that starts tomorrow. So we wanted to get these subgroup meetings done early and try not to overlap, although we will have one meeting on Wednesday, but not overlap with the special session. And then we'll see how the special session goes, and then we'll try to schedule our next meeting after the special session so that everyone can participate fully. So the first thing on our agenda this morning is to select our subgroup chair and vice chair. And last week in my email communication to you all, I asked for you to start thinking about if one of those positions or something you'd like to help us out with. And I think for these positions, we would really be looking for someone to serve as a point of contact with our office to help facilitate conversations with the group members, especially as we're scheduling meetings and as we get further into this process to share information and provide some guidance based on the group members. So at this time, I'm just going to open it up to the floor. This is kind of informal. We don't have a voting process for this. This is kind of a consensus-driven process. So I will open it up to the floor for any discussion or anyone like to volunteer to fill one of those roles. I know in our next group, subgroup, I've heard some discussion of not having a chair and a vice chair, but having 2 co-chairs to help co-lead the group. So that might be something that next subgroup considers. But I'm open to any and all discussion that you all have at this time.
You'll allow the subgroups to meet as often as needed, but how often do you envision the subgroups may need to meet and for how long?
So at our first meeting, I think one idea that we had was the subgroup is probably going to need to meet 3 to 4 times between now and the end of October, probably once or twice between the first and second meeting and once or twice between the second and third meeting. But that just kind of depends on how much discussion you all get through, how engaged everyone is, and up to the will of the groups as to how much time you'll need to spend. We budgeted 2 hours for each of these meetings, but we'll see how it goes, especially as we get into more engagement with the public and stakeholders and subject matter experts. We may need to budget some more time. And if we don't have any volunteers, I can start calling on people as well, or we can feel like a teacher in front of the classroom. So to remind everyone, to get you all thinking, that the purpose of this legal and regulatory subgroup is really going to be discussing what are the laws and regulations here in state government, or here in Virginia, that we're going to have to change if the General Assembly decides to legalize adult use marijuana. So that could be everything from looking at our criminal code to looking at things related to driving under the influence, employment law, kind of the whole a cornucopia of different places within state government, within our code, that we might have to change. So that would be the purpose of this group.
Brad, this is Nate Green. Can I suggest that we maybe do introductions to see who all's on the subgroup, and then maybe, maybe once we know who we are, maybe we can decide who would be a best leader.
Nate, that's a great idea, and I completely skipped that in our agenda, so I apologize for that. So I think the easiest way to do this is for me to just go down the list that I have of folks that responded to me that they wanted to serve on this. And if they're on the call, introduce themselves and maybe talk a little bit about their interests. So the first person on my list is Holly Wood from the Attorney General's office.
Good morning. My name is Holly Wood. I'm from the Office of the Attorney General. I am in the Major Crimes and Emerging Threats section. So about half of my work is devoted to prosecution and the other half devoted to client agency representation. And my clients are, the heavy hitters are State Police and Department of Forensic Science. And I've been a prosecutor since 2011.
Great, thanks, Holly. Jen Michelle Padini from Normal.
Good morning, I'm Jen Michelle Padini. I'm the Development Director for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and I serve as the Executive Director of the state affiliate, Virginia Normal. Anyone who's worked on cannabis policy in the state has had the pleasure of working with me.
Kristen Howard from the Virginia State Crime Commission.
Good morning, this is Kristen Howard. I'm Director of the Crime Commission. Sorry, my phone is having issues. Is that better?
That is better.
Sorry about that. Director of the Crime Commission. We were included in the legislation mandated to participate because we had looked at the decriminalization of marijuana several years ago. So we did a lot of the research and provided that to the General Assembly and our Crime Commission members. So we have a little bit of familiarity with the issue, but it has not been something we have looked at in terms of legalization.
Great, thanks, Kristen. Jewel Bernal, Commissioner Bernal from VDEX.
Good morning to everyone. I'm Jewel Bernal, VDEX Commissioner. Currently, we provide the oversight for the Virginia Industrial Hemp Program, where we lead in the cultivation, licensing, pesticide use, and food safety. We may play a similar role in terms of marijuana legalization. And I have an additional staff member on, Charles Green.
Thanks, Jewel. Sam Coffrin, Dr. Coffrin. I don't see him on here. He may be able to join us a little bit later. Injustia Bebe from Columbia Care. Let me make sure that I'm not missing folks in the attendee list that I haven't made. There, Injustia.
Thank you for the unmute. Yes, Negus Bebe with Columbia Care. I'm the Director of Public Policy, so I work on a number of cannabis-related issues for us across the country, both in specific states and on federal topics. So that's my background.
Great, thanks. Nate Green.
Yes, my name is Nate Green. I'm the Commonwealth's Attorney for Williamsburg and James City County. I am also the Legislative Committee for the Virginia Association of Commonwealth Attorneys.
Thanks, Nate. David Brown sitting in for the Board of Pharmacy.
Hi, I'm David Brown. I'm Director of the Department of Health Professions. The Board of Pharmacy is part of Health Professions, and I'm sitting in because Caroline Jurin has a separate work group going on this morning, and I'll probably stand in for her in all of these subgroup meetings just because her plate is really full. The Board of Pharmacy, as you probably know, oversees the current medical side, the pharmaceutical processor program, and we are also involved in the work group looking at medical marijuana.
All right, thanks, Dr. Brown. Michael Carter from Virginia State University.
Michael Carter from Virginia State University Small Farm Outreach Program, Cooperative Extension.
All right, thanks, Michael. Colby Ferguson.
Hi, Colby Ferguson from the Department of Vehicles. I'm a senior policy analyst in the Department of Legislative Services. Obviously, DMV is here to talk about highway safety, but one of the reasons why we requested to participate in this work group is because, as you all know, marijuana is still illegal on a federal level, and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, who deals with commercial driver's licensing, has regulations that are related to that. And so our primary area of concern is making sure that we maintain compliance with those and that we protect substantial highway safety funding that comes along with that compliance.
Thanks, Colby. And then we have a couple folks who are joining us that were not named in the legislation, but that are going to be serving as partners with us as well from a couple of different state agencies. So Linda Jackson from Department of Forensic Science.
Yes, good morning. I'm Linda Jackson. I'm the director of the Department of Forensic Science. And obviously we have had the responsibility of analyzing marijuana over the years for criminal matters. I was a drug chemist for many years prior to becoming the director. And so it's important to us to maintain a lot of those criminal laws are all sort of intertwined. And so it's important to think about how changes to the law affect the analyses we do and the support we provide to the criminal justice system. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Linda. And then we also have, I think he's calling in Captain Richard Boyd from the Virginia State Police.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm Captain Boyd of the State Police. I'm in charge of our Bureau of Criminal Investigations office in the Richmond Field office, but have worked all over the Commonwealth in various roles. Obviously, depending on what the legislation is, will have an impact on what we do normally.
Great. Thank you, Captain Boyd. And then I also see someone that I didn't have on my list, but I see Joe Mayer from the Tax Department.
Yeah, this is Joe Mayer. Sorry, it took a while to get me unmuted. I'm just listening in. I think it's important to understand the regulatory framework so that the fiscal issues can be lined up with it.
Great, thanks, Joe. And then, is there anyone else on the panelist list that I've missed? And I'm going to look in our attendee list as well to make sure I haven't missed anyone else. All right, great. Well, thanks again for everyone joining us and for that round of introductions. And now that we've covered that agenda item, we can move on to talking about a chair and vice chair. I would open it up to the floor for any discussion, anyone that might take an interest. And this is not going to be, shouldn't add a lot to your workload, but just to be kind of a point of contact for us as we move through this process and to kind of help facilitate the meetings in the same way that I'm doing now, but to to work with the group to move through these conversations. So I'm gonna ask, since no one is volunteering, but Jen Michelle Padini was talking with me earlier this morning before the call, and I know that Jen Michelle, you have a wealth of knowledge in this area. So I was thinking maybe you might want to serve in this role for us.
It'd be my pleasure, Brad.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone else that'd like to serve as a co-chair or a vice chair? Nate Green, would you be willing to serve in a co-chair or a vice chair role with Michelle?
Certainly.
Great, thank you. And I really like the idea of doing co-chairs because I think it shows that we're being very collaborative. So I think if everyone is agreeable to that, we can set it up that way and move forward and really appreciate you all stepping into those leadership positions. So now at this point, this meeting is going to be much more of a discussion based and free flowing discussion. I'm going to try to step back and let you all take the reins now. But first, I'd like to introduce my colleague Heidi Hertz. Heidi, if you want to say hi.
Good morning, everybody.
So Heidi is our Assistant Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry and has graciously volunteered to take notes for this morning, and I'm gonna share Heidi's screen. If I can figure out how to do that, which I think I can. I did practice last week. So Heidi is now our presenter, and she's going to share our screen. And so now we have a place where we can take notes and have this to make public for members of the public to see, and then also to send out to everyone. And really the purpose of this brainstorming exercise is to talk about all the different policy questions that we think this group is going to need to answer. So we can really list those out, have some good discussion, and then our staff and then everyone on this team can take those policy questions and then start doing some additional research to be able to come back to the group, hopefully with some answers or maybe some more questions or maybe some options for us to consider at our next meeting or on down the road. But I will now just leave it up to you all to start having that discussion, and Heidi's going to take notes for us, and I can jump in as needed.
I guess I'll kick it off. One of the policy questions that I have is kind of looking at marijuana a little bit like we look at alcohol. We do control the alcohol content of alcohol that's sold in the grocery stores and at the ABC store. You know, are we going to make any efforts to control THC levels in marijuana? In my experience as a prosecutor, the THC levels have really gone up significantly in recent years. And I don't think, you hear the comment all the time that this is not your grandfather's marijuana. Is THC level something that we would like to regulate?
Yeah, I think we can look to the guidelines we put in place on our medical cannabis program. We've already taken steps towards this here in the Commonwealth from a regulatory standpoint, where we have adopted the same standards that are used across the nation in adult use states. And it's generally the serving size and the total amount of that package where you're looking to set those types of restriction or guidelines. And I think that this is to kind of go past that, and this will also be presumably part of the recommendations from the JLARC study, but we would be looking at what the possession limit is, and oftentimes possession limits are identified in various categories. So you may identify a possession limit for botanical cannabis, which is the green flower, whereas which can be quite voluminous, and whereas you may set a different or a lower weight, a lower amount for concentrates and products of that nature. We've done something similar to the medical cannabis program. Clearly, consumer needs are a little different there, but we've put a 90-day supply on that. Of course, there's a pharmacist involved, whereas in this situation, it's we don't have those same safety protocols, but we should be looking at possession limits, and within that, what serving sizes are, particularly in the edible type products, which is what we've seen in other states. They've had to come to terms with and put some consumer safety standards in place.
Jen Michelle, following up on that, have other states, is there a difference between the possession limits and the serving size, and then like what the crop itself in the field, if are there limits on that, and are there testing requirements around what it can be kind of coming out of the field?
Sure. So in regards to adult use products or even medical, it's not the plant itself where you're looking to set some arbitrary number. Plants are obviously a little bit in control of their own destiny, and even two plants that are genetically identical can, based on where they're located, whether it's at the north end of the field or the east side of the field, or the southeast corner of the room and the northwest corner of the room, can have different outcomes, different cannabinoid content outcomes, even though they started out as genetically identical. So you generally are not looking at controlling limits in the plant or in botanical cannabis itself. It only gets to be so, the THC content only gets to be so high in botanical cannabis, and consumers generally are self-titrating when it comes to that. And that stands even for concentrated products. It's really when you're looking at edibles where consumers tend to have inadvertent often issues because the onset is so slow, because it has to be metabolized by the liver before they have 45 minutes to an hour before they're feeling the effects of what they consume. And new consumers to edible products typically have that overconsumption issue. So that's in America why we've come to this 10 milligrams is the serving size of, and you have to indicate in the product that it is one serving is this amount, and it's either visually identified, typically with some additional THC stamp or marker, so that the consumer understands there is THC in this serving, and this is the one serving size, and in this total package there are no more than 10 servings. That's kind of a standard, not that we need to specifically adopt that. And then there will be it's really in edible products. I think the lesson learned I can offer is that it's in edible products. When you get into inhalation type products, consumers are trying to get to the point of efficacy generally, and what history has taught us is that they tend to consume up to the point of efficacy and then stop. Whether that is in a low dose product that they have to inhale a lot of to get to the point of efficacy for that individual, or if it's in a highly concentrated product where they have to consume just a very small amount. So you want to indicate what the serving size is in any product, and then really looking at packaging and labeling in edible product. I mean, in any product is important, but for that mitigating overconsumption, you're really looking at the edible products is where you want to be particularly mindful with that.
Yeah, I just want to chime in here and echo, I think that packaging and labeling component, I think will be really important as we look at what the regulatory requirements are. I also think that I just want to add a little bit of context here, which is when you look at some of the more mature adult use markets, there's actually a huge, or one of the fastest growing parts of the consumer market are looking for low dose, controlled experiences. So I think we should also be mindful that consumers be mindful of the facts of how adult use consumers are interacting with this product. And a lot of folks are looking for something that is the equivalent of a glass of wine type of experience. And I would also come back to the fact that some studies have indicated as many as 2/3 of folks who are participating in adult use markets are participating for health and wellness reasons. They're looking for something to help with an ache or pain or to help them fall asleep at night. They're not necessarily looking to get or actively seeking out intoxication. And so we should keep in mind that vast array of customers and consumers when we think of the regulations and who we're trying to serve, and clear labeling and packaging for folks to understand exactly how much they're going to consume, how long it might take for that to have an onset, things like that, that when you come in through the medical program, you talk to a pharmacist and a pharmacy technician and get a lot of that kind of clinical perspective. And we can make that kind of one-on-one version available on product labeling and packaging, which you see in other states. I'd also add there, I think on the broader question here between this work group and the fiscal and structural one, are we going to be approaching social equity business models, and which one is the more appropriate one to bring that up in?
That's a great question, and I was just thinking about that myself, and I think we can bring it up in both work groups and make sure that we have a robust discussion about it. So I would welcome any thoughts that you have there.
Yes, I would just put forward, and again, this kind of spans both because it's definitely a regulator issue, but it's also a structural kind of issue, which is how do we set up license structures? And in particular, when we're talking about social equity participation, it's important to have opportunities that are lower capital intensive for folks to get in. And I know the Medical Coalition already said this to the JLARC study in our interview, but we do support a model where vertical integration is permitted but not required for the future of the program. We, of course, as medical operators, had to comply with the laws that the General Assembly passed when they created the medical program. And so we would like to be able to continue operating under the laws that we were required to comply with, but that going forward, vertical integration is not required for an effective and well-regulated cannabis industry. And very importantly, it enables other folks who have less access to capital, the ability to start their own businesses and enter the market. And I think also plays a role in reducing the harms that prohibition brought on certain communities in the Commonwealth.
I'm going to, if I can, jump in and see if Michael Carter from VSU, as the director of the Small Farm Outreach Program there, might have any thoughts from the farmers that you work with, Michael, who might be looking to get into this industry, and as a farmer yourself, thought about what types of licensing models might be helpful there.
I was thinking about that as talking about this. I think the first thing is kind of limiting the supply of outside marijuana to keep it local, for lack of a better term. Regulations in terms of getting the seeds delivered. That can be a major issue if you're coming from, I don't know, California, you're sending seeds interstate across the state lines. They pass through various post office hubs, dealing with that issue. I know majority of the farmers I know who got hemp licenses guided for the opportunity to grow marijuana. So it's really trying to open it up for individuals, especially if they may have felony issues, to still be able to grow it. It seems to be problematic if you're went to jail for selling it and now everybody gets an opportunity to grow it at your expense. You know, it's a matter of time that, you know, you sold it at the wrong time. And they shouldn't be punished for that, especially if it was non-felony related. And I think, you know, I get really controlling supply though from outside source, outside states is going to be critical. Giving our farmers the first right of refusal to grow it, and especially our socially disadvantaged farmers. It's a way of kind of leveling the playing field for our growers. If they have an opportunity at, I don't know, state-sponsored markets or other markets, so they can actually get their product to the market at a viable price. I could see that larger corporations, and I mean, that's generally the fear, that the larger tobacco growers are going to get in and kind of lower the price for high quality initially and kind of squeeze small farmers out. So the monopoly is usually for larger growers who have great access to capital.
Hi,
Brad, this is Joel. Can you hear me? This is Joel.
I can hear you, Joel. And I think David is next too.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to comment and appreciate Michael for his comments. Deputy Commissioner Charles Green, who's on the call, has arranged for us to have several conversations with other states, Oregon, specifically Colorado, and we have been asking that question about social equity in terms of what those states are doing to try to ensure that different individuals can enter into the production and sale. And, you know, a lot of states are considering from a regulatory side the entry points such as licensing fees. They're trying to keep the licensing fees and other fees at a rate that is not going to limit those who do not have means, because they want to give everyone an opportunity to be able to enter into the business model, be able to grow and sell. Also looking at technical assistance to help those with making business decisions in a variety of business models. So we've had some conversations, and we will be bringing that up for discussion in the fiscal and structural work group as well. So just wanted to make that point. Also, another question is in terms of our regulation, we be considering other product categories, such as, you know, the flower, vapes, edibles, patches, and et cetera. So that's another question for consideration.
I just want to echo what you said, and I would just recommend, and I can help facilitate this. Illinois, I think, has also, their program is one of the newest, but also was one of the most thorough in terms of from conception on the equity front, including the way they created the licenses and then ran and operated it. They obviously faced some setbacks due to COVID. And so the announcements have been delayed in terms of getting these businesses up and running. But I think it's been one of the most robust social equity pieces of legislation in cannabis to date, and would recommend that we and can help facilitate bringing in some folks from that regulator, if that's helpful.
So, Brad, this is David Brown with DHP, and I wanted to echo the comments made about the overlap between the different subgroups. I think, you know, none of these things can be parsed out precisely into talking about the regulatory structure or talking about the laws and regulations or talking about the health effects. I think there's inevitable overlap in all of these. I wanted to address some of the comments made about whether there should be some type of limits, potency limits. And whereas I completely agree that with the medical model, you have a healthcare provider who is helping determine what appropriate doses are, how they interact with the person's underlying health conditions or other medications they're taking. And but I think the landscape's a little different when it gets to recreational use. I mean, I agree that edibles is apparently where the big concern is. But at the same time, while it's true most users may be similar to the users of alcohol, looking for the effect of a glass of wine, we know with alcohol, there's people who that's not where they stop at all, and there's all sorts of both health effects and societal effects that come from abuse and overuse. And I guess I'd like to research further to make sure do other states that have recreational use have no limits whatsoever on potency for recreational use. Because it seems to me that from both the health effects and from effects on things like driving while impaired, other societal effects, that there may be something we want to make sure we're not missing an opportunity as this program gets established.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. And I think I can speak a little bit to that. You know, we do have over 2 decades of regulatory experience with cannabis in the United States. And there are a number of lessons that we can learn. And the prevailing one has been, particularly in regard to potency, it is edible products where we have that concern. It's important to keep in mind that cannabis, while we often compare it to alcohol, is really not analogous in an intoxication level. There's only so intoxicated one's going to become from cannabis, and the adverse effects are feeling mildly to moderately unpleasant and needing to take a nap for a while. So it's not, there's not a potential for toxicity, for overdose, for death, and NHTSA has done 3 very comprehensive studies on highway safety impacts. We should certainly be looking at those. And what the user's experience is with, in particular, when it comes to the intoxication one, experiences from cannabis, absent alcohol, it doesn't have that increase in risk-taking behavior that alcohol does. In fact, it has the opposite effect. And I think most people who have any, knowledge about cannabis would recognize that as sort of the trope of paranoia, whereas alcohol tends to increase your risk-taking behavior, cannabis tends to decrease the risk-taking behavior because it heightens the awareness and the individual is aware that they're impaired. We saw a lot of self-reporting of that in these NHTSA studies where people simply didn't want to continue participating in the study where they were operating a motor vehicle because they felt impaired. So while we should
just to interrupt, who is NHTSA?
NHTSA, National Highway Safety Traffic Administration. Okay. So while we should absolutely be concerned about things like highway safety and consumer safety and impairment, we really should be keeping in mind what cannabis impairment is. And it's not analogous in that potential for serious detrimental health effects to alcohol or opioids or something like that. So, generally we're not seeing in other states arbitrary, cannabinoid content limits on products until we get into the edibles because they are metabolized differently. Inhaled products are fast acting, so consumers tend to know within about 5 to 15 minutes exactly how much they've consumed. And they're short lasting. So at 90 minutes max is about where the peak has begun to dissipate.
Sorry to interrupt conversation, but I wanted to let everyone know that we have Dr. Coffrin has joined us. So Dr. Coffrin, if you're on and would like to introduce yourself, thanks for joining us. I can see that you've unmuted yourself, but we can't hear you. There, you're unmuted again. Hopefully we'll be able to talk to Dr. Coffin a little later as I'll work with him to get technical issues figured out. One other question that came to my mind as we were having the discussion about licensing and participation in the industry itself is, I know some other states have created allowances for folks to grow their own at home, and I can't remember. It was on that list, I think, that Dave Cotter showed us a couple weeks ago. But I thought that might be something else that we wanted to discuss here.
Yeah, we hear this very loudly and on constant repeat about when will personal cultivation be allowed. We don't currently allow it under the medical cannabis program, and it is a consideration that is outlined in the JLARC study, and certainly one that probably fits into this legal and regulatory subgroup. We should be looking at allowing personal cultivation and looking at what guidelines other states have put in place for personal cultivation.
Another item I wanted to add in terms of policy considerations would be considering some policy that allows for a robust seed-to-sale tracking and trace system. And that's to avoid, potential diversion or inversion, and one that allows for good oversight taxation.
I just want to echo that one in particular, an effective seed-to-sale tracking. I know that we have that in the medical program, and would definitely like to see that expanded to an adult use setup.
I think it's important that we look at what we have established in the medical regs, when we're looking at what we're going to put in place for adult use, because we don't want to have, duplicative systems in place where, we'll have one of our existing licensees operating in both spaces and they're having to duplicate. So certainly we can look at things, like seed-to-sale tracking, like security requirements, the consumer safety testing protocols and labeling. There are for our medical program, we have some of the tightest standards in the country, and it doesn't really change why the person is consuming the product. Doesn't change the need for consumer safety. So I think it's important that we look at and maintain those as much as is feasible. I did take some notes. I want to call back to a few things in particular. Michael was mentioning employment, and thank you for that. We certainly need to look at how records are impacting employment within the cannabis industry. We've taken a few steps to address that very lightly with the medical program, but it's by far insufficient, particularly as we're still lacking with comprehensive expungement in this state. And to his point, we don't want to, keep people who have been disproportionately impacted by prohibition from participating in this new industry. That's so important. And then somebody also brought up, I think it was Michael, seeds, and I'll share that I had a visit from the FBI once the medical program licensing had been done. They were interested in learning more about that process and some of the other things. And what we didn't legislate it was how the seeds or the genetics get into the state, because it was really difficult to, write a state law that says, here's how you violate federal law. So we should be mindful of that. We make that recommendation.
So from forensic science, I just wanted to share a couple things. We also interviewed by the JLARC folks. They're doing. We talked about how that when laws are contemplated, that the one thing that we were not going to be able to do was to be able to tell plant materials or products apart of whether they were sold legally, or they were sold outside of the program, like plant materials. Plant material, that's not something that we would be able to differentiate to support any kind of program is put into place, and that any kind of that requires for a criminal charge a quantitative analysis of THC to determine that the product or material meets a certain THC limit is more time consuming and so forth, and would make it more difficult for the testing versus less, more straightforward. We also had provided them, we had our toxicology program manager is on the health subcommittee of this group, but also has talked to the JLARC people a couple of times about the driving issues, and we have provided data to them of THC concentrations that were in driver's blood in Virginia. There's a lot of caveats to the data, but that data is available if it is of interest to anyone. The one thing that our toxicologists across the state are in agreement on is that there is no scientific reason or scientific level that is necessarily appropriate for a per se statute for something proving driving impairment, because of the different way that alcohol is metabolized very straightforwardly in a linear fashion, whereas drugs, and THC being a drug, is not a linear fashion, and different people have different tolerances and so forth, and it is not something where any of our toxicologists will testify to a specific level of THC in the blood being impairing. And so that is another thing that if such a law is contemplated, that just to be clear, that it's not going to be based on science, but it would be an administrative codification of a number.
Thank you so much, Linda, for sharing that. That is the same conclusion that NHTSA came to. Happy to share that NHTSA information with anyone who'd like to review it as well. And the reason why states that have per se limits, that their per se limit was established based on the lowest number they had the technological capability for testing for at that time. It, as Linda said, is not, it's not based in science. There is no agreed upon number that indicates impairment with THC metabolites.
Brad?
Yes, hi.
Hi, Brad, thank you. This is Nikki Zamosny, Deputy Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security. I apologize if there's background noise. I'm on the road this morning, so calling in, and have been listening but couldn't quite figure out how to get myself unmuted. So that, thank you, Brad. Appreciate the discussion so far and all of these issues. I also want to make sure, and I believe we have Captain Boyd with the State Police on here. I do want to make sure that that this work group focuses on some of the infrastructure that we may need for enforcement. There was conversation about edibles early on. There was conversation about personal cultivation of plants, and I know that those are issues that have come up a lot in other states, and so I think we really need to be mindful of that. I think we also need to be mindful of potential crime implications, and I believe in other states they have found that because this is primarily a cash business, that there has we've seen a significant increase in criminal activity, transporting things back and forth between state lines, theft of plants, and all of those types of issues. I know there have also been implications with regard to fire services. So I want to make sure that those topics also come into play as we work through some of these issues.
Great. Thank you, Nikki. Really appreciate that perspective. And Captain Boyd, if you are on and unmuted, I think I still have you unmuted. If you have anything to add there, would love to hear your perspective.
No, I appreciate that, Nikki. I'd just like to reinforce what you said. I know that some states that have gone legalization or a similar route have seen a uptick because of the cash business. The places where the profits are held become targets for very violent criminal activity and major violent groups. And so there's that's another implication we need to consider as well. And just to kind of piggyback on that too, because of the federal regulation, something to consider is the impact to banks as well, right? Banks cannot usually hold on to this cash, so it has to be stored somewhere. But yes, thank you, Nikki. I appreciate it.
Perhaps Nigist could share some insights as to what they've been dealing with in regard to cash handling and mitigating those impacts in other states, as well as what our medical licensees are exploring here currently.
Yes, so and I think there are a number of different implications when it comes to the banking and cash-based nature of this due to the lack of federal reform. One, we do have relationships with banks, and though we do remain, because we cannot use credit cards, we have to do debit or cash-based transactions. We do have a high volume of cash. However, we do have formal banking relationships. Any cannabis business pays a significant premium on all of our banking transactions because of that, because the banks have to allot additional staff time in order to audit and ensure that we are, a state legal operation. And so there's very limited banking options for cannabis businesses. But I believe all of the 4 pharmaceutical processors in Virginia have found banking solutions. So we are able to, deposit our cash and, I have direct deposit for my paycheck and have found ways to participate in the formal banking economy. That said, those fees will also present hurdles to any smaller business owner. And they also present hurdles even for our ability to use certain types of contractors, because even an HVAC guy might come in and might try to deposit a check from us and might have their bank reject that check or things like that. In other states, they have created state level rules to help de-risk financial involvement from banks in the cannabis industry. And I know at the federal level, the Safe Banking Act passed through the House. And though it sits with the Senate at the moment. And so there's a number of efforts going on both at state level and federal level to address the banking crisis or I shouldn't call it a crisis, but the banking challenges. I'd like to add on to that a few other elements when it comes to some of these parts of the regulatory, and perhaps, again, this is where I enter the blurred line between the fiscal and structural group and the regulatory group, but 280E is an obscure section of the federal tax code. That means that any cannabis, because we are operating with a federally illegal substance, there's a significant portion of our cost of doing business that we are not allowed to deduct from our revenue the way a normal business would. So we pay an extraordinarily high federal tax rate. Other states have created reforms in order to remove the state implications of 280E and make it more fiscally rational structure for a business to operate in. Especially when we start talking about social equity program applicants, like removing some of these tax implications that come from federal prohibition are really important for folks to be able to have accurate revenue projections and create business plans and then secure capital to start their businesses. I'd also like to add to the policy area for regulatory advertising. I think having some clear regulations around what the advertising and marketing options are for legal cannabis businesses is important. And I would throw out there that at the moment, if you operate in CBD, you have largely far more advertising options than the current medical processors do in Virginia. So if you sell CBD in a bottle that may have as little as 5 milligrams, you can have a billboard and buy ads in a local paper and put out all kinds of information about your product as long as you're, obeying certain key rules. And on the medical side, we're not able to do any type of paid advertising whatsoever. On the adult use side, when we think about what that is, we should also be thinking about what are the rules and regulations around effective advertising, including things like making sure children aren't being targeted, making sure that there's reasonable health claims, things like that ensure that the advertising here can stay focused on informing people about new businesses and their opportunities, but not creating false claims or doing things that are inconsistent with our broader public health interests as a state.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to try once again to unmute Dr. Coffrin, Sam Coffrin. So, Dr. Coffrin, can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. It's a pleasure to be able to join you all and listen in to some very pertinent comments regarding the legality of this. I think it's not whether it becomes legal, it's how much it's advertised and pushed to the general public, which is going to really make the huge difference. And since we can't adequately be able to test impairment by any kind of medical testing at this particular point, we are having to, kind of fly by the seat of our pants, and this is not a comfortable feeling for any of us. I concur the fact that the people that have been hurt the most by us criminalizing everything have been those who have been at the lower end of the spectrum socioeconomically. And I would like to make sure that the laws that we end up having are able to address some of those discrepancies. Thank you very much, and I appreciate and will continue to listen in.
Thank you. One question that I have, really based on my experience living in a adult use legal state in Washington, as we're talking about the questions around advertising, especially, but really where can the products be sold was a big question, I know, in Washington state. And that I think that might be something that bleeds also into the fiscal and structural group, but where, for instance, can a retail location be placed? What kind of signage can that location have? And all those sorts of questions as well. So if anyone has any experience in those questions, would love to hear some insight.
Yeah, we certainly do have limitations in place on our medical cannabis providers, so we should be cognizant of those, as a number of those are likely to become adult use retailers as well, or at least want to be. So yeah, I think that they're pretty conservative when it comes to where those facilities can be located. Nigist or Dr. Brown could probably speak to that. And I think when we talk about advertising, we should keep in mind that it's conveying that information to consumers about location and operation. What we aren't seeing, particularly in traditional advertising platforms, is product. But we do need to have a way that our retailers can communicate that they are in fact open, what their hours are, where they're located, and that is contained in advertising. Certainly, we don't, we don't want advertising to children, and we don't want that necessarily product in your face advertisement, but we do want to be sure they're able to communicate through traditional methods that they're open and functioning. We're running into issues with that with our medical program right now.
Mm-hmm. Just back on location, I think there's some good precedent in other states around, like how far away things must be from schools and daycare centers and things like that, while also still ensuring that it can be in a relatively accessible spot. I think one of the challenges that you see with vertical integration is when you have to house both the planting all the way to the final sale transaction for patients in one location, we end up in locations that are, further out of the way, harder to get to, tend to be in very industrialized areas, because that's where we can find space that's large enough for the cultivation that needs to happen. And so if we move away from vertical integration, that will also, having these additional like retail only locations, will need to have a different set of regulation compared to cultivation space, which will have other consequences, including being able to have odor remediation and able to have all of the security protocols that we have in all of our facilities across the nation.
Another something else that we may want to consider is the voice of the locality. In some states, the localities have opt-in or opt-out for marijuana businesses. And for those who decide to opt out, they forego the sales tax that will come to them. And also businesses that are seeking to open in that locality cannot get licensed. So there is a voice of the locality that needs to be considered as we move forward, and how localities are going to be engaged in the process.
Oh, yeah. I would just add, I think we've seen in different states different results from local engagement, and in some cases it's been very helpful. In other cases, for example, in California, not only did they do opt-in, but they also devolved a lot of the authority to the local level as a result, and while I don't think that's really consistent with how Virginia's government in general is set up, it created a lot of unintended side effects in terms of the license structure, market saturation. The social equity programs were being designed at a local level, and that also led to really challenging situations for social equity license applicants and folks who are trying to participate in those programs. So I think finding the right balance between being able to have a structure that's consistent across the state for somebody who's trying to open a business, while also respecting some of the local needs is going to be key there. In particular, I mean, you might be somebody who lives in a locality who has a really great business idea and has land there, but if your locality opts out, all of a sudden everything that you thought you had and that you thought you had done to make yourself ready for this business opportunity will poof, like no longer matter.
I think that those are great points, and we'll definitely add our partners with localities to our list of folks that we need to engage at a higher level on this too.
And, Brad, this is David Brown. I think several threads in this conversation point out to me that while we have separate work groups looking at medical marijuana and recreational adult use, I think it would be important moving forward, and I think this will happen because we have overlap in the composition of these two groups. But I think it's important that these things not be done in isolation, but we really give thought as to how the two have similar underlying rules and regulations, so we decrease the confusion and increase the opportunity.
Great point. Thank you, David.
Brad, I had another policy question in terms of the regulatory process. So the agencies who are involved will we need to follow the APA regulations as they're developed, or would the General Assembly perhaps want to move forward to put certain regulations in effect that are necessary?
Yeah, that's a great point, Jill. And I think that's, you know, going to depend on kind of what the situation looks like with the General Assembly and how far along we feel like, and from the JLARC study, everyone in state government feels like we would be at the time that the General Assembly, if they decided to go this route, is. And so I think that's something that would probably, that's an important question, because having to go through that regulatory process is a big undertaking. So that's a great point.
I think that something we should explore is what a regulatory body for cannabis looks like. Currently, we have Board of Pharmacy regulating medical. We have VDACs regulating hemp. Anytime these two silos want to interact, we have to legislate that. And a part of the JLARC study is to explore an agency, or at least an umbrella agency specific to cannabis regulation, under which you know, these three silos could operate, those three being adult use, medical use, and industrial hemp, so that there isn't this need to legislate every single time they're going to interact. So we should probably take a look at that and then see what other states have done, where they've put that agency, whether it's under their health department or other ag department or other places.
Yeah, thanks, Tim Michelle. That's a really important point, and I think the structural and fiscal group will be having that discussion as well. And I know, in addition to VDACs and Board of Pharmacy, ABC is on this group too. So they could have some insight there as an agency that regulates a product that was formerly prohibited and that's very controlled in the state.
And we'll receive significant input, feedback from JLARC direction on this. JLARC has retained a consulting firm that specializes in preparing states for these regulatory changes.
Great.
This is Linda. I think that's really important, because as Virginia has been making changes in the medical and hemp areas, there's been a lot of times where definitions have been created that start out being a little contradictory. If you get down in the weeds of them, looking at the different, you know, which cannabinoids are present and the concentrations, and, you know, if it was grown here, if it was not, if it, you know, a lot of different definitions make things very complicated. And so having that overarching body that could help make sure that when something is considered in one area, it doesn't then mess up another area with unintended consequences.
And having been on the front row of that, Linda, I definitely think you have a great point there.
Yeah. Sorry to make you relive that, but.
I had another question about potential processing for licensing. Like right now, currently with the processing license for hemp is different from a grower's license. I know right now medical marijuana is vertically integrated, but I assume is one license for all. Secondly, is the legalization or the legal battles that may ensue because of cross-pollination between plants with farmers. If you're growing hemp versus you're growing marijuana, you will destroy either one of those crops by being within a 3-mile radius of the other and growing so, and that could cause some serious litigation amongst farmers.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And other things.
Different states have different approaches to that. Some states set distance requirements, and some states say it's a free market, do what you want. That's really important. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really important one.
A question for some of the experts on here. Is there, we know that there could be implications between a hemp industrial hemp field and a marijuana field, could there be implications between different strains or breeds of marijuana plants?
Chemovars, we call those chemovars.
Chemovars.
Unless you like made up words, then you can stick with strain. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
They're just regular plants. So
I would dare say probably also honey production. You could throw off a whole honey hive with wildflower versus wild marijuana. And the way marijuana seeds can set, they call it weed for a reason. It grows profusely. They can really, deal with some of the, I guess, environmental issues in terms of, some of these cultivars are very controlled and they haven't been into the natural element yet, especially in this element, and they could be invasive. They could be very problematic environmentally as well.
Yeah, and to that environmental impact point, we do require indoor cultivation on our medical program, but that has a significant environmental impact in and of itself. And is that something, that if we're looking to provide economic opportunity to small Virginia farmers, then requiring indoor cultivation is probably not the best option. And so we should be looking at not necessarily requiring indoor cultivation, but allowing the option for either or. And a few people have brought up, how we do have this vertical licensing requirement at the moment. I don't think the majority of folks have an appetite for maintaining that requirement. Certainly, since we have it, we should allow it, but it's so important that we move towards a tiered licensing structure so that we can have retail and cultivation and production licensed separately, create more economic opportunity. And to that economic opportunity point, we do have these existing regulators in the state, so we can look at using some of those. There's a benefit to allowing existing regulators to participate in the adult use program, and while it may be economically advantageous to them, the greater advantage is to Virginians. While we wait for the round of licensing, at least initially for adult use providers, we do have these existing regulators, and allowing them a pathway to speed up getting adult use operational is beneficial in that their licensing fees can be used to provide capital to those who might not otherwise have access to it. Those fees can be used in the expungement process or other restorative justice components that are germane to undoing the harms of prohibition, and it helps offset the illicit market that you're otherwise going to experience in that timeline between, the legislature convenes and decides to legalize adult use, and that takes effect on July 1, but then we've still got that gap until we can, get the regulatory model operational. If you can allow existing regulators to at least sell, after paying for it, to sell to adult use consumers, it does cut into that illicit market activity some.
That brings up another question, or reminds me of another question that I've been thinking about, is how, for lack of a better way to describe it, how much does the state want to be involved in kind of the market dynamics of this new market? How much do we want to be involved in controlling the supply, matching supply with demand? And I ask because I know that some states, I think I've heard about this in Oregon, and maybe Dr. Bernal can talk to this from their conversation with Oregon. Supply initially really outpaced the demand for the product, and so prices plummeted, and a lot of the farmers and processors were hurt by that. So just a question to throw out there.
I'm really glad that question came up, and in particular because I think we've seen this happen in Oregon on the supply side. I think in Oklahoma, we've seen, I mean, they've issued more medical dispensary licenses than any other state, and we all know what the population of Oklahoma is. And so there are some folks who are going to face obstacles for their businesses. And I think it's very important when we talk about the cannabis industry and the potential for economic opportunity that we're very measured and responsible about what it actually means to operate in this space, and what it means to set up a thriving marketplace. I think in other states, for example, Illinois started their social equity program with 75 additional licenses, which will effectively double the size of the dispensary footprint. Not 100% certain with their craft grow how that growth is happening, but they did expand for all of the initial sales. And tax revenue has been coming from the medical operators who paid early fees in order to be able to add adult use to their co-located medical dispensary. And they use those funds to help fund the early stages of the social equity program and the tax revenue that's been coming in. However, the way they structured their market is these initial 75 licenses, and then I believe every 2 years or every year, there's a study to assess where they are on supply and demand and how many more licenses should they be releasing. And I think that kind of combination of having a reasonable first guess and then constantly looking to use the evidence to assess what's next is also important for making sure that folks don't just get licenses that will end up going bust or be duds because the competition is so fierce, similar to what happened in Oregon on the supply side. But also making sure that we're leaving room for the market to also educate us, because we can only forecast so much. Our data is only so robust at this point, and we have to be able to quickly adapt and expand or adjust in relationship to what actually happens once an industry is created.
Thanks. That's really helpful, really insightful. One topic, if I could, unless there's anything else on kind of this road that we have been on for a while, I'd like to switch it up a little bit, if I might. We haven't talked any about the topic of highway safety, and we talked very, very little about that. But I know that we have some representation from DMV on this work group, and I've also heard outside of these groups, but some other stakeholders who are interested in having that discussion. So I want to make sure that that's something that we put on our list. But I would welcome, especially from Colby and then from anybody else on the group who has some experience with that.
So Colby Ferguson here from DMV. As far as highway safety is concerned, DMV does not really have any major concerns at the moment. Our biggest concern is driving while under the influence. That's currently captured under our current DUI statute. As far as FMCSA is concerned, and on a national level, I think we've already talked about this, there are no strict levels that they've identified as issues. So as long as we kind of stay within the bounds of what we currently have in code for DUI, we don't really have any concerns. You also see in some other states, I'm sure we'll look at this, that there are issues with possession while in a motor vehicle. We have some FMCSA regulations that deal with possession in a commercial motor vehicle that we kind of have to keep an eye on. But otherwise, we don't really want to wade too much into those types of policy decisions. Otherwise, DMV is just kind of looking back and seeing what you guys are discussing.
On that, I do just want to highlight something, which is that I'm not aware that any state has done a PSA campaign on driving under the influence of anything besides alcohol. And I think that part is really important because a lot of the time when we start looking at a transition to broader adult use, folks focus a lot on enforcement, but not as much on prevention. And just like Americans had to be educated on the impacts of driving under the influence of alcohol, folks need to be educated not just on the influence of cannabis, but also anything. Sleep exhaustion can impair your driving, opioids, over-the-counter cold meds, all of those things can impair your driving and mean that you shouldn't be on the road. And there hasn't been enough, I think, to help work on the prevention side of driving while impaired in response to cannabis becoming legal for adult use. And instead, there's a lot of focus on punishment and enforcement instead of education, which could actually help us prevent these, any incidents from happening in the first place.
Nickist, I know that Massachusetts is running education campaigns, at least based on educating adult consumers to properly store their products, so to prevent youth access. I think that, an education campaign is a great idea. A number of states have used some of their tax revenue to fund evidence-based education. Colorado was an early adopter of that. And I see the ads that I see them in our ads manager on our website, and I appreciated seeing those ads from Massachusetts. They were very thoughtful and education based, and it's a great idea. Something that we need to consider is, and this is, relative to our medical cannabis program as well, is employment, drug testing for employment and in other circumstance as well. A number of states are moving away from that now and reforming their laws so that it's not required. Certainly, there are always caveats for safety sensitive positions, but when a substance becomes legal for adults to use, we should look at whether or not it's still a best practice for the state to arbitrarily discriminate against responsible consumers. And there are ways, there are platforms available for impairment testing that don't rely solely upon bodily fluids. There's products like predictive safety. I think it's called Alert Meter, and it's software based. Or a number of software based applications like that can be deployed roadside or on a factory floor that are gauging impairment based on impairment, not with the objective necessarily of criminalizing a specific substance, but with gauging for impairment. And then if that threshold has been measured, then you can move to bodily fluid testing. So yeah, pre-employment drug screening is a big thing.
I got a question on employment opportunities in terms of on farm. There are usually a lot of youth on farm. How would they be regulated? Would it be a special exemption? I'm going to have a lot of farmers or young people on my farm that want to intern on a marijuana growing farm or hemp farm. How do you deal with that in terms of youth and farming and involvement with the crop? Because it's a great way plant for agriculture, but if it's regulated where you can't do anything with it till you're 18, we're going to miss a lot of youth in that 4-H and FFA phase.
Oh, that's a great question. Definitely something we can explore a little bit more. And we might be able to look at some of the models in the alcoholic beverage industry, where I know at a certain age you're able to work in certain parts of that industry, even though not legal to consume until you're 21. And I'm trying to remember, I grew up on a tobacco farm myself, and I'm trying to remember if there was anything. I don't think there was any sort of special. I'm looking at Heidi too, because I know Heidi worked in tobacco when she was growing up as well. But that's a great question, Michael. Thanks.
Brad, this is Nate Green. I think that also invites the question, what are we going to define as adult use? Is it going to be like alcohol at 21? Is it going to be like tobacco at 18? When is it adult use and when is it prohibited because you're too young?
The national standard is 21.
Jen Michelle, are there any states that have done anything other than 21?
That's what I was presuming.
Nigus, you're an operator.
I'd have to go check. I'm not sure about the existing states. I believe the vast majority are 21 and up. However, I do think Montana's current ballot initiative for adult use sets the age at 18. So if that passes, that would definitely be a state that's setting it at 18 instead of 21. But we can dig into that and get an update out to folks.
And I believe some states may have started at 18, but the trend is certainly now to set that equal threshold of 21. Canada did a study recently that came back with they were exploring. Cannabis is legal at the national level for adult use in Canada, and they explored what is the correct age, what's the best age for adult use access, and I think they came back with like 19, but that's what Canada thinks. Doesn't have to influence our policy here, or it can.
This is Dr. Corin. One of the concerns I have is that since the use of marijuana is so prevalent within the young population, we don't want to kind of have these little blinders on and say, well, this has got to be adult use. But we've got to address, how we end up dealing with the younger population that are going to be using marijuana. Because it's so prevalent illegally.
I mean, that's something we have to deal with as a state right now. And we did look at, what the penalties are for that under decriminalization. And it is predominantly young Virginians, poor Virginians, and Virginians of color who are or who have been charged and convicted of cannabis possession. And as we move to improve these laws and lessen the societal impacts of criminalization, we certainly don't want to exacerbate that criminalization in youth. And the legislature opted to handle it as delinquency right now. So, but that also begs the question of when we move to adult use, you'll have there's the potential for that gap from 18 to 21 where you're not a juvenile. And then what's that penalty? And that is the most criminalized group right now is in that 18 to 24 bracket.
This is Linda. Just because I'm not aware, it seems that since tobacco has now been increased to 21, and alcohol, obviously, years ago when I was in college, much to my chagrin, was moved up to 21. How is that age group handled? With those, it seems that we would look to that.
Absolutely.
To cut in, I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to be heard, and I want to especially call on Holly from the Attorney General's office. Holly, if you're there, because I know that the Attorney General has been working on these issues for a very long time, and so I want to make sure that we have a chance to hear from your office, especially on some of these policy questions that we've been discussing.
Yes, I've been listening in. I think it's been very productive and very thorough conversation. I don't really have anything to add in addition to what's already been discussed, but I appreciate the dialogue.
Great. And thanks for joining us.
Hey, Brad, this is Colby. I just wanted to chime in real quick. I just wanted to go back to the employment and drug testing screening. I just wanted to flag this as one of those areas where we need to be concerned about FMCSA regulation. They require CMV operator employers to do testing for controlled substances, which on federal level will include marijuana. We don't really have any opinions on how or what we should do about that, but I just did want to flag that as one of those areas where we need to be careful about our CDL program.
I just want to echo that. I'm sorry, I keep opening with that, but I'm writing on everybody else's comments this morning. That it's not just for CDL, but also given as somebody who was formerly a civil servant with the federal government, that one of the challenges Virginia will face until federal prohibition ends is that anybody who has to was a federal contractor or works for the federal government will still have to be there. And I think many states, when they've done the employment testing laws and regulations, have basically left that carve out for if you're impacted or subject to federal regulation, then you're allowed to maintain that for obvious reasons that can't be controlled or changed by a state without serious consequences for the employers and businesses. And that work has to happen, keep happening at the federal level.
Great point. Thank you.
Yeah, another question I have is the culinary use of these products in restaurants, and would they have to get an ABC license, especially if they're not already selling liquor, but they want to do health infused canna butters or marijuana microgreens or something to that effect? What would their regulations be? And then would that card younger people who come in looking for a smoothie with some marijuana microgreens in it?
And I think that's an important point too on a few different parts of the license structure, just that there's definitely cultivation, processing, and retail, but there will be these other innovative business ideas folks will have, and the potential to create different types of permits or licenses for folks to legally innovate around the substance. I'd also add on the federal point too, there's also the issue of folks, and this is perhaps a little bit more of a medical, but also affects adult use. For folks who live in housing that is federally subsidized, they face different challenges to being able to consume, both just as an adult user, but also for medical patients, that they don't have a safe place to consume because they could be subject to eviction. And that part around parental and housing protections as it interacts with the substance, I think is also really important, that we start applying kind of the same way we approach any type of substance use disorder more broadly, instead of just, folks can have a glass of wine and still keep custody of their kids and live in their houses.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Nigus. That's something we're currently struggling with in our medical program, where it certainly was not the intent of the legislature to create a state-sanctioned healthcare program that is then weaponized in JDR, but in fact, that's exactly what's happened. And states are learning that not only do they need to provide protections for consumers and responsible consumers in the workplace, the same thing extends to housing and to parental rights as well.
I want to be aware of our time, trying to wrap up this a little bit before 11 a.m. so we can move into our second subgroup. But just to ask if we have anything additional to add to any of these points or new items before we move along to discussing kind of our engagement process and maybe some of the experts that we'd like to hear from throughout this.
Brian, this is Captain Boyd.
Yes, sir.
I just, as we're talking about the regulation of these things, and preventing the underage use, the underage distribution, the regulation of who can work in the fields. I think something to consider is who is charged with that enforcement, right, of those regulations, and what do their budget structures look like to accommodate this? This is a significant change for Virginia, and certainly for Virginia law enforcement, and what's going to happen to the budgets of not only the law enforcement agencies, but the prosecutor's office, like Mr. Green's office, that are charged with prosecuting the violations of any of the regulations, and where do their budgets stand?
Great point. Thank you. Thanks for that insight. I think we're going to have a lot of learning to do. So again, just being cognizant of our time, I thought we could use the last few minutes of this meeting to discuss how we'd like to engage with stakeholders, subject matter experts, and members of the public as well throughout this process. I think our team had envisioned, now that we've got this really robust list of policy questions to discuss, I think we can think more about where we can go to find some answers or find some data, or find some additional information on that. But I think it would be great if we could, as a group, hear from some experts or stakeholders that will help us through these discussions. And then I've also, just in talking with some colleagues here in the Patrick Henry building, gotten ideas about how to do some further engagement with the public around maybe some sort of listening session, or setting up something that's a little more robust, that allows for some more participation to really make sure that we're having those discussions and building the trust that we need to, so that when this report is finalized, that the General Assembly can be confident that we had all of those conversations. So I would just like to open it up to the group. I think what we envisioned when we first talked about this was setting aside one meeting of each subgroup, where we have invited a list of panelists to come in and maybe give a short presentation to us, and then be available to answer some questions. And I think that is something that we'd still like to do, if you all are open to that. And then also, maybe, what do you think of the idea of doing something that's these are all open public meetings, and we publicly notice them and everything, but doing something that's much more public facing, to where we can try to have a wider audience to have some greater participation. So I'm just going to pose those questions and see what the group thinks.
I think I think that we have some great resources that are available to us. The American College of Occupational Environmental Medicine has people who have been working on this whole issue, especially as it deals with companies and trying to be able to make some sense out of the national issues as well. And they might be a good resource to find people who would be willing to talk about the legal ramifications as well as the medical ramifications.
Great, thanks for that recommendation. I guess one thing to just mention, that knowing in all this that the special session is coming up starting tomorrow, we have another large full work group meeting on September the 16th, and I really hope that special session is over before then, and I think it probably will be. But maybe posing the idea of if we want to have a second meeting of this subgroup before that, maybe that week of Labor Day. I don't know if that could be difficult for folks if you are traveling during Labor Day, or doing something on that Monday or Tuesday before the full group meeting. But I want to make sure that we're talking about schedule too, because in our short time frame, that's pretty important. Could we say maybe tentatively penciling something in for the week of Labor Day, maybe like the 8th, 9th, or 10th, something like that, and then we can see how special session goes and see how people's schedules are. Guess I'm also jumping ahead a little bit in our meeting agenda, so I apologize about that.
I think that week, excuse me, I think that week looks good on my end, and I feel like that's probably enough time for any, if we're using some of that for some of our expert contributions. I guess my biggest concern would just be that we make sure anybody we're inviting to speak gets a heads up at least a week in advance so they can prepare.
Great point.
Yeah. My only request would be that it's not on the 10th.
Okay.
The National Cannabis Policy Summit is that day, and you can all watch it. It's broadcast on C-SPAN the past 2 years.
This is Captain Boyd. I would echo what Jen just said. The 10th is a little tough for me as well, but anytime in the early afternoon-ish on the 8th or 9th is good for my schedule as it stands, and I can certainly move things around based on the consensus.
Does anybody have any other? Go ahead.
Are you going to do a doodle poll to determine this, or?
I can definitely do another doodle poll. I think that worked well. We were able to find these meeting times relatively easily. I think for each meeting, we either got everybody on board or there was just one person who couldn't make it.
Brad, it's Jewel.
Yeah.
I just had one. It's a very mundane issue, but I wanted to bring it up before we get off the call. I know this is a public meeting, and we kind of selected co-chairs, but for the sake of this public meeting, do you think we need to just ensure that we've gotten agreement? We all are in agreement, but for record, just agreement from everyone that we've selected our 2 co-chairs, and that will be as part of the public record of this meeting.
That's a great point, Joel. That is probably something that we need to do, and we don't have Justin Bell on with us to remind us. So thank you for reminding us. So I think we have Jen Michelle Padini and Nate Green volunteered to serve as our co-chairs. So the easiest thing to do would probably be just for me to go down through the list and call the roll of everyone to see if they say yay or nay on those 2. So Hollywood.
Yay.
Jen Michelle Padini.
Yay.
Kristen Howard.
Yes.
Jewel Bernal. Sam Coffin.
Yes.
Ngista Bebe.
Yes.
Nate Green. Can I hear you, Nate?
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Brown?
Yes.
Michael Carter?
Yes.
Colby Ferguson?
Yes.
Linda Jackson? And Captain Boyd.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. And then I just noticed that Secretary Moran was able to join us. So, Mr. Secretary, do you have any comments that you'd like to provide to this group, or anything that you'd like to discuss?
Thanks, Brad. No, not really. I caught on a little bit late. I had some other things with respect to special sessions, but I'm going to try to join these calls. Scheduling permits. I'm very interested in this, and certainly the legal regulatory, I think, is probably more my lane than some of the others. So me and my office will attempt to be as involved as the schedule allows.
Great, thank you. As far as our stakeholder and subject matter expert engagement, what if we said, I can follow up with an email later this week after we finish all of our subgroup meetings, and then any ideas that anyone has in terms of a subject matter expert or someone that you think we should invite. For example, Dr. Corin, someone from the American College of Environmental and Occupational Management, if you know someone who would be a good speaker, helping us make that contact and helping us reach out, and maybe just leaving that up to individual group members, because you all have so many connections, and helping us build out that list of experts. Would that work for everybody? Take your silence as a good thing. And then the other question that I have is, and we haven't quite figured out how to do this yet, but we know that there's a wealth of information out there in the world about all of these issues. And so now that we have this great list of policy questions, if everyone could start doing some research and finding resources and materials to share with other members of the group. And I think, to make sure that we're complying with all of our open meeting laws and everything, I think the best way to do that is probably, again, going to be to email me directly, and then we'll figure out a way to share that more widely with the rest of the group, and then make sure that the members of the public can see that in the proper way as well. We are creating a website on the governor's website, because we have 4 different secretaries leading this. So we're creating a website where we can put all of this, and so maybe that would be a good role for that in addition to our meetings.
Brad, I just a couple of months ago, I did have a very lengthy conversation with the Massachusetts Commission of Cannabis. They actually created their own commission. Had a very informative conversation with him, telling him we were going down this road and soliciting some input. He was very, I think that might have actually been pre-COVID. So he talked about coming down anything you need from him. He was very receptive to informing our discussion as much as possible. So I'll throw that out. Obviously, COVID had changed things, but it might actually be easier for him now to actually join by phone, if that would be helpful at some point. So I'll forward you along his name, and we can talk offline whether or not that might be something. But obviously, there are other states that have gone down this road, and that is just one. But I thought that was interesting how they created their own commission, and independent from other it didn't come under the Secretary of Ag or Public Safety, et cetera. It was a separate commission. So just throw that out there, and I'll forward you the information sometime. I think we could benefit from having him give a short presentation, particularly, and we could limit it to just the legal and regulatory framework rather than the broad swath of Massachusetts marijuana policy.
That's a great idea. That's really, I think, one of the great things about the position this work group is in. So many states have already done this before, and the ability to call on them and learn from what other states have done. So thank you, Mr. Secretary. So I don't think we need to vote on anything with regard to that. I think I'll just be in touch, just like I was after our first meeting, with some additional guidance. But we do need to, the last thing on our agenda is public comment. And so we had a couple people who registered for public comment for this meeting. So we're going to move into that that portion of the meeting now. So the way this is going to work is we've got folks registered who are joining us as attendees, and when I call your name, I will unmute your line as an attendee, and then we'll give you. Looks like we have just a few minutes left, so let's say maybe 2 minutes per person. And so there were just the two so far, but we have some other folks on the line that may want to speak as well. So what you'll do after we do the first two is use the raise hand function, which if you pull up your chat box, you'll see a little hand down at the bottom that you can just click and it'll show us that you would like to speak. But the first person that I had on my list registered is Jasmine Washington. So Jasmine, I think I've unmuted you. Let's try this out. It's the first time we've done this.
Hey, good morning, everyone. And I do apologize. I was in error. I'm sorry. I put it in the chat. No comment.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I just see that now. Sorry about that. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. So Ann Lee, are you unmuted?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. A second to throw something out there for you. I represent the Scott's Miracle-Gro Company, and one of our subsidiaries is Hawthorne Gardening, and we are one of the nation's leading providers of nutrients, plant supplements, air filtration, all sorts of growing media that is used in climate control and any indoor sort of growing of plants, including cannabis. The company has been involved in all of the 10 states who have adopted adult use or any of the legalization. And I saw from the last full meeting that one of the topics that you may be discussing in this subgroup is the growing and production requirements. So we would like to be able to participate and maybe do a presentation if the growing and production is coming in this group as opposed to fiscal and structural. But we have a lot of resources and a lot of best practices about responsible production, distribution, consumption, and the like. So we just really enjoy the opportunity to participate.
Great, thanks, Ann Lee. That's a great resource. Really appreciate that. Let's see. Do we have anybody that has raised? So that was the only two that I had registered. Anyone raised their hand? Maybe. Let me see. Michael, would you like to offer public comment?
Yes. Let me see if I can. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
And yeah, and please state your name at the beginning and if you're representing an organization, who you're representing.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Michael Krauss. I'm a disabled United States Air Force veteran. Actually, I was previous executive director of Virginia Normal. We helped resurrect that years ago. I run Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. We're a national not-for-profit veteran service organization. We're the guys who negotiated with the VA on the VA medical marijuana policy back in 2010. In this process and following it very closely, also working with AMVETS on Virginia policy, and we're hoping to enter into this dialogue. So just want to introduce ourselves, let you know that Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access and AMVETS are trying to follow this process as best we can, and we're certainly available to participate and want to give our input from working with other states. The last thing I'll mention also, we were very involved in adding post-traumatic stress medical marijuana laws across the country. So we have a lot of time in the trenches working through these legislative processes in various states as they created these laws. So we're very happy to help and participate. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Michael. And I forgot to mention that if you're calling in on the phone, which I think we do have a couple more call-in users, and you would like to provide public comment, you can press *3, and then it will display just like anyone else. So I'll give folks just a couple more seconds to do that. So anyone calling on the phone, *3 if you'd like to provide comment. All right, let's see. I have Chris. I think you're unmuted, Chris, from Senator Evans' office.
About 5 years of work in the General Assembly, working on some of the cannabis-related issues. Want to thank you for your work on this. Plug you to ask what the best resource is to share constituent concerns related to this on a work group level. And then also to just quickly say that we would be, as you move towards the outreach and the larger public facing components of this, to make sure to loop us and other General Assembly member offices in terms of outreach about these meetings so that we can help with our networks to publicize them and make sure they're as comprehensive as possible. Thank you for your time, and that's it.
Great, thank you. And I will just say in response, I think once we get our website up and functioning, once Aaron gets a chance to do that, we may talk about setting up a specific email so that they don't all just come to me or they don't all just go to one of our other team members. So we'll have a further discussion about that. If nothing else, though, I think that that wraps up everything that I had listed on our agenda, unless anyone else has anything. All right, well, I think we can just consider ourselves, do you remember, Jewel, do you remember if we did a motion to adjourn the last meeting or if we need a motion to adjourn this meeting?
I don't think we did, Brad.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. Consider this adjourned. I'm gonna stop recording and then we'll pick back up here in just a couple minutes with our second group meeting.